The wife did something unacceptable and in retaliation, the husband did it. Today's story with a similar plot. Enjoy watching it. I glanced at the caller ID before answering the call. It was strange in itself to receive a call on the Sunday afternoon that my wife Claire and I had set aside for family. But what was even stranger was that it was my lawyer calling from Vero Beach, Florida. Hello, Pete. What's happening? Hello, Dave. Look, I'm really sorry that I'm calling you on a Sunday, but I heard something I'd like to check with you. I was out golfing this morning with the usual company, including George. You remember my friend George, don't you? Certainly. Nice guy, terrible golfer. Yes, that's him. These days, he works in real estate in the city, specializing in agricultural properties. He told me that your garden was sold to some developer. I told him I hadn't heard anything like that from you, and I thought you would have told me if you were going to take such an important step. I listened to Pete and was so shocked by what he had just said that it took me a few moments to come to my senses. No, we definitely didn't sell the garden. You know, we thought about developing it ourselves when the time comes. That's what I thought. Look, maybe George was wrong. I'll do some searching tomorrow when everyone gets back to work. I appreciate it, Pete, but I think I'd rather fly there to check. I haven't been there for 3 months, which is longer than usual. Anyway, I should go there just to keep an eye on things. I didn't know why, but I had a bad feeling about it. We said goodbye, and I called Claire. Claire, do you want to come with me to Vero? Pete heard a rumor that I need to check. We sent the children to their grandparents indefinitely. They didn't mind, they loved spending time at the ranch with their grandparents, who spoiled them to the nines. 2 hours later, we already had tickets to Orlando and were packing our bags. We flew into Orlando the next morning, and I rented a car to drive to Vero. I tried calling our grounds manager, Bruce McWilliams, to have someone come pick us up, but he wasn't answering his cell phone. It wasn't that unusual, he was an avid fisherman and could be out of cell phone range for a couple of days if he went to one of the islands. Maybe he just forgot to charge his phone before leaving last night. I went online and checked my bank accounts. The smaller account, which Bruce had full access to, was emptied and had only $150 left, the minimum amount to keep the account open and avoid an automated message. But we only kept $125,000 in this account for day-to-day operations unless there was a specific need. Our larger account, which usually had about $100,000, Bruce did not have access to. I had blocked all the money in this account to prevent any withdrawals. Just in case it turns out to be much ado about nothing, I can remove the block without anyone knowing about it. Driving on I-95 past Cape Canaveral, Melbourne, and toward Vero, I was reminded of my early childhood on the east coast of Florida. My grandfather originally bought the garden plot in the 40s. Land was cheap, and he bought a tract, a square mile of land about 5 miles from the Indian River Lagoon. He built a typical sprawling concrete blockhouse and planted the property. By the time I was born, my grandparents had moved to one of the new retirement villages, and our family had moved into the ranch, as we called it. The garden itself consisted of about half grapefruit and half various varieties of oranges. We had white, pink, and red Marsh seedless grapefruit and Hamlin Temple pineapple, as well as the usual red Navel and Valencia oranges. We had several rows of tangerines and several varieties of Duncan seeded grapefruit, but those were for local consumption only. The varieties we meant to produce from September to June. Growing up, I didn't really keep track of things like most kids, so I didn't learn much from my elders about how to grow citrus fruits. I think I learned a lot through osmosis. Anyway, Vero was a great place to grow up back then, sandy beaches, sunny skies, lots of tourists in skimpy swimsuits, and plenty of mischief to get into. Most of my friends were into surfing. It sounded good to me, but I wasn't crazy about it. I loved going out with the guys on boats out of the Sebastian Inlet, 10 or 20 miles out to sea, deep sea fishing. I grew up with a bunch of local kids who were much like me, sons of families that owned citrus orchards. We learned to drive tractors, spray trees with pesticides and fertilizers, and help our parents during the harvest. It didn't mean we were picking fruit, we had temporary crews to do that. But we were lifting 60, 70, or 90-pound boxes and putting them on trailers to take the fruit to the processing plants or packing plants, where they were cleaned, packaged, and shipped like fresh fruit. Bruce McWilliams and I were especially close. His father did not own a garden but managed several gardens for absentee owners. Bruce planned to attend the University of Florida in Gainesville to pursue a degree in agriculture. Don't laugh at the modern degree in agriculture. It's part business, part chemistry and biology, part marketing, and part soil science and animal husbandry, in addition to all the general educational courses. In other words, a degree in agriculture covers a lot of material. The modern farmer takes on a difficult, albeit rewarding, task. Anyway, Bruce's family moved away when we were in 6th grade, and from then until we graduated from high school, he and I were best friends. We went to the beach and learned the pros and cons of drinking too much. We went to proms as couples and took our girls' virginities in the same night. We shared many common experiences. Bruce was 4 inches taller than me until our second to last year. He reached his full height when we were freshmen, but in our second to last year, I caught up with him, and we started looking into each other's eyes. He was not only taller in his early years, but also more massive. I was slim and wiry, Bruce was stocky and muscular. While I ran cross-country and track, Bruce played center on the football team and catcher on the baseball team. Bruce's activities made him one of the big people in the school, mine, not so much. Despite our differences, we remained close. The third member of our little company, Pete Andrews, joined us in 8th grade. Pete, now my lawyer, was a quiet member of the team, a little more diligent than Bruce or me. Pete lived about half a mile away from us with his parents in a house closer to the beach. He was an only child and all he ever wanted was to be like his father, who was a lawyer. Pete was one of the geeks in the chess club, but we met in the orchestra, where he played trumpet and I played clarinet and saxophone. He soon joined Bruce and me, having fun and getting into trouble that would get us arrested today but was considered normal teenage behavior back then. The police at that time could take us home so that our parents would give us a good scolding, but they would not arrest us. Of course, we didn't rob stores or shoot people. We did catch a little alligator and put it in the pool in front of City Hall. Yes, we could be the culprits of that. My time at Vero came to an end, however, at the end of our final year at school. The garden was developed and running smoothly, so the family hired Bruce's father to manage the garden. Part of his compensation was that the McWilliams family lived rent-free in a house on the property. He continued to manage other gardens, so he had a profitable small business. My mom and dad still came into town at least 6 or 8 times a year for a week or more, keeping an eye on things and still enjoying their friends in the area. In fact, they bought a house on the beach nearby because they stayed there so often. I later used this beach house when I returned to the city. My wife and I moved there after our wedding, using it as a second home. Claire loved the place and had her own circle of friends in town with whom she played tennis and socialized at the country club when we were in the area. After high school, we invited Bruce's father to manage the garden, and my father bought 2 more plots of land, this time in central Tennessee. My father's true specialty was raising certified black and red Angus cattle for beef. He and Mom moved to Maury County, south of the Columbia County seat, and started their ranch. To be honest, Bruce, Pete, and I would have split up anyway. Bruce went to the University of Florida in Gainesville in the fall, Pete went to Duke University in North Carolina, and I went to Vanderbilt University in Nashville. Bruce, of course, was an agronomist. Pete studied political science as a pre-law major and then got a law degree from Wake Forest, and I got an economics degree and then an MBA. Vanderbilt does not offer an undergraduate business program, but their Owen Business School is highly ranked. However, we all kept in touch. It was easy to keep in touch with Bruce since his father took over the management of our garden. Every time we came to check on business, which was quite often, I would probably see Bruce eventually. Bruce's father retired, and Bruce took over the business. He was a respected orchard manager, a rarity in the world of scammers that made up the Florida citrus industry. Pete and I didn't see each other much, but we talked often and met up after school was over. After law school, Pete returned to Vero and became our lawyer. We mostly saw each other at social events. He promised not to take money for it. When we arrived in Vero, I dropped Claire off to unload our luggage and begin organizing meetings with local friends. I continued on to a local chain restaurant where I arranged to meet Pete. Pete was already seated when I arrived. He waved to me as I walked in and I walked over and sat down. Well, I didn't speak directly to George this morning, but there's a rumor going around among people in the real estate business that one of the development companies has bought your garden. Damn it. Well, we'll stop it today. The seller probably hasn't submitted the documents yet. By the way, Pete, the garden's operating account was depleted to its minimum last Friday. I blocked all other accounts when I went online to check their status. Fine. I would suggest this myself if you hadn't already done so, but it's worth going to the bank and also to the real estate agency. Pete answered thoughtfully. At this point, if the morning wasn't already in complete crisis, Big Bubba Smith walked in. He noticed us and approached us purposefully. Hey, boss. What the hell is going on? I knew I wouldn't like what I heard. Bubba, as he was known, grew up in Fort Pierce near Vero. He was a tall, thin, chain-smoking black man who had managed our garden operations for 20 years. He received the nickname Bubba because people thought his face was similar to that of former professional football player Bubba Smith. Basically, half the big guys in the South are called Bubba. I think his real name was Dwayne, but as soon as someone called him Bubba, the name stuck. I stood up, took Bubba's hand, and shook it before we sat down. I signaled to the waitress for another cup of coffee, which appeared almost instantly. So, Bubba, why don't you tell me what the hell is going on? Well, first of all, Bruce told me that you were thinking about selling the garden, but he told me not to tell anyone about it because it's still in doubt. But more importantly for the garden's operations, he sold 3 tractors and left us with only the old Deutz. And to make matters worse, no paychecks were issued last Friday. Damn, I said. Pete added, without a doubt. Bubba just nodded his head. It took me a few minutes to think about everything. Okay, Bubba, I'll go to the bank and get paychecks for you and the crew. I still need to go there. Bruce is lying if he told you we're selling the garden. Do you know who he sold the tractors to? I think I know. It seemed like a couple of his friends, and there was another guy who was apparently looking for a 3rd tractor, he answered. Fine. Then why don't you call the agricultural theft unit at the sheriff's department and file a complaint? Tell them that you told me Bruce was selling equipment, and that you became suspicious, checked with me, and found out he was stealing and selling garden equipment without permission. Tell them they can call me to confirm, and I will happily sign the complaint. Glad to help, boss. Damn, this John Deere was almost new, only about 20 hours of work. He drained his cup of coffee and stood up to get started. Now I had another problem, getting paychecks for our crew. I needed to call our payment service and transfer money to them so they would issue checks with the correct withholdings and taxes. I might do this later in the day. First, I had to go to the bank. When Pete and I arrived at the bank, I asked for the manager. Henry Wright was another local boy, not from our class and several years younger than us. We all knew him. Henry quickly walked out of his office towards Pete and me. Hi, Pete. Hi, Dave. Boys, I'm so glad to see you. Dave, I've been trying to call you all morning. Let me guess. Are you interested in blocking the accounts that I installed? Certainly. But let's go to my office to talk there. There's no need for the whole world to know about your affairs. Agreeing, Pete and I followed Henry into his office, and he closed the door behind us. His office had glass windows overlooking the parking lot on one side and the bank on the other. The wall behind him was solid, no one could sneak up on Henry. Henry first offered us something to drink, water, coffee, or soda. We told him that we had just eaten and didn't need drinks yet. Can I talk about your accounts in front of Pete? Henry asked for confirmation. Certainly. He is our lawyer here in town and is helping me understand the situation. Henry continued, Bruce came in last Friday and withdrew all but the minimum required to maintain an account for your operating needs. He has the right to sign on this account and has the right to do so. I asked the cashier after he made the withdrawal if he said anything about what he was going to use the money for, just out of curiosity and not because I was concerned. She said he didn't say anything about it but was friendly as usual, although he seemed to be in a hurry. Then this morning, he came with a power of attorney signed by you and wanted to make another large withdrawal from your main account, which he doesn't have access to. The same cashier who saw him on Friday told him she didn't have the authority to handle the transaction and asked me to look into it. I looked at the account and saw that you blocked it last night, but I didn't mention this to Bruce. Instead, I asked to see the power of attorney document. He didn't blink an eye. He gave me a notarized copy of what he called a power of attorney, granting him access to the account. He said that when you were doing preliminary assessments to develop your garden for sale to a construction company, which would require outside consultants and testing to check compliance with state and county requirements. If so, he implied that you would begin running water and electrical lines to the site. His explanation was not unrealistic, but I knew you had gained access to the accounts and blocked them. I told him I needed to make several copies of the power of attorney. He seemed a little hesitant but agreed, and I told him I couldn't proceed unless I got a copy. I promised to return the original once the copies were made. He gave it to me, and I asked June to make a couple of copies. After she was done, I gave him the original back. I think he expected that this would be the end of it and that he would be able to draw a conclusion immediately. I explained that, like the cashier, I was unsure how to conduct a power of attorney transaction and needed to call the main office to have someone explain the details to me. I told him he could return in the afternoon to complete the operation. By that time, I was already somewhat suspicious. After he left, I took out the signature cards that I had seen you sign in person. When I compared your signature on the card, two things struck me. The signature on the purported power of attorney looked like someone had traced it from another document. We received some training in recognizing forged signatures, and this had the hallmarks of a forgery. The letters weren't written in long, flowing lines, and there were small places where the letters didn't line up correctly, as if someone had copied one letter at a time. But the real confirmation was what I remembered from seeing the original signature card. Your signature included your middle name, but this document only had your first and last name. You're right, Henry, and very observant. I have always used my middle name on legal documents. Right, Pete? My middle name is Wellborn, after my old family name on my mother's side. I've never used it for anything but legal documents, so other than Pete and my family, not a lot of people knew about it. At that moment, I looked to the left through the window into the parking lot and saw what I thought was Bruce's truck. He had a 2-year-old Chevy 2500 4x4 with a distinctive silver metallic paint that made it easily recognizable. He seemed to slow down in the parking lot until he was behind Pete's car, and upon seeing Pete's license plate, Law Pitbull, he took off like a hare. I stood up abruptly. Son, was that Bruce right now in the parking lot? I ran out of Henry's office through the main doors and into the parking lot, quickly followed by Pete and Henry, but all we could see was Bruce's truck speeding away. Well, I turned to Henry and said, the good news is that I don't think he's coming back anytime soon. Pete agreed. Yes, I think he realized that his scam with the bank had failed. Pete looked at me curiously. Out of pure curiosity, what would you do if you caught him? I thought for a second. I would keep him here until you call the police and arrest him. You understand, Pete replied, that at the moment we have nothing to arrest him for. He had the power to withdraw money from the transaction account, and his other potential crimes that we know about are based on hearsay. Plus, he still outweighs you by 50 pounds and has a local reputation as a bully. You could get hurt if you try to physically restrain him. I looked at Pete and smiled. You're probably right. At that moment, Pete's phone rang with the characteristic Perry Mason melody. He turned to Henry and me, asking permission to leave while he was on the phone. I said goodbye to Henry and waited for Pete to finish the call. Pete hung up and turned to me. It was George. He told me which real estate agency an agent sold your garden and who bought it. It was the agency of Andy Lopez and Associates, and the recording agent was Andy's daughter, Estella. And guess who the buyer was? I shrugged. Indian Riverland Developers. Jake Stern's son. He's approached us, 3 times in the last 2 years? 4 times, actually, Pete corrected me. So what's the plan now? I asked. I think I should go back to my office and start writing letters. First, a letter that will be sent by registered mail and also by email to Bruce, informing him of his resignation from management of the garden. Then a letter to Andy Lopez, informing him that the sale of the garden land was carried out under false pretenses, demanding the immediate reversal of all actions related to it. And a third letter that we can forward to all other interested parties who have previously dealt with Bruce, letting them know that they will be paid and, if they are customers, that they will still be sending their checks to our garden address. You need to go home and make sure all the credit cards are canceled, although he's probably already maxed them out and sorted out the paychecks for employees. Okay, Pete. Call me later with any news that comes up. Agreed. Paying wages to the garden crew was not that difficult. We only had 5 full-time employees, Bubba, 2 other men who performed various garden maintenance duties, and 2 women who handled financial and production accounting, such as counting the boxes of fruit sold, tracking who they were sold to, and managing payments to the temporary crews working in the gardens. I called the payroll service and transferred the necessary money from the freelance account. They took care of the rest. I knew it had to be done quickly since most farm workers lived paycheck to paycheck. Our people were better off than many, but they still needed a stable cash flow. I made sure that they were provided for, and in return, they showed amazing loyalty to us. I opened my laptop and saw that Pete had sent me draft letters for approval. I approved them, and Pete sent them out, officially severing our relationship with Bruce McWilliams' management firm and notifying the realtors to stop the deceptive sale. A final letter outlining our position would be sent to all interested parties who had previously dealt with Bruce, notifying them that they would be paid and, if they were customers, that they would still be sending their checks to our garden address. We only had 1 garden credit card, and as Pete predicted, it was maxed out. I stopped the possibility of additional withdrawals, but this was after the horse had escaped from the barn. Luckily, the card had a limited credit limit as well as a daily maximum for cash withdrawals. Maybe I can give something back. Urgent matters were completed. Claire left me a message that she was having dinner with a few of her friends from the club and that I was on my own for dinner. Since I had a few hours to spare, I grabbed a glass, put a large ice cube in it, and went to the liquor cabinet to pour myself a shot of Scapa, a single malt Scotch whiskey from Scotland's northernmost islands, Orkney. It was so light that its taste exploded in my mouth, awakening all my taste buds. It always seemed to inspire my thoughts. Sitting in my reclining chair, I leaned back and thought about how Bruce and I grew up together. For a long time, we did everything together. We caught that 4-foot alligator and put him in the reflecting pool in front of City Hall. Another time, we added detergent and some dye to the fountain in front of one of the upscale hotels on the Barrier Island. Both places installed security cameras after that, so our fountain fun stopped. Sometimes we would sneak into the garden, start one of the tractors or other equipment, and move it from place to place. We never damaged them or took them out of the garden because that would have been stealing, not just naughty, so we set a boundary for ourselves. It was with Bruce that I first tried alcohol, had my first cigarette, got drunk, and smoked a joint. I learned a few lessons from those first experiences. After I vomited everything in my stomach, my father dragged me out of bed the next day and made me work in the garden all day. I limited my drinking after that. To be clear, not everything we did as children was bad. We were both in Cub Scouts, went deep-sea fishing with our dads when they rented a boat with a professional captain, and got good, if not excellent, grades. I was usually a better student than Bruce, but I wasn't going to be the top student in the class. We did extracurricular activities. Bruce played football and other sports, and I played in the orchestra and ran cross-country and track. Overall, I never thought that our early lives could lead us to a criminal career. Events like this attempted garden sale have made me look at some things more critically. As we got older, Bruce and I became more adventurous but edged closer to illegal and dangerous activities. I admit that even though Bruce was coming up with ideas, I was willing to go along with him. Bruce was bigger than me and a little older, and I knew he did riskier things without me when I wasn't around. He always managed to get away with it. He was my closest friend, and I think I always subconsciously sought his approval. After our other friend Pete joined us, he was probably smarter than me because he refused to participate in some of Bruce's crazy ideas. He told us that his goal was to become a lawyer and that even minors with criminal records would have a hard time getting into a prestigious law school. We accepted it and didn't blame him. We kept inviting him on our adventures, as we called them. Sometimes he came, sometimes he didn't. I understood Pete's long-term thinking about his life goals, But even if he said it with a smile, Bruce called him a weakling or a coward for avoiding our wildest antics. When we were teenagers, there were several occasions when we went down to the harbor and took some absentee owner's boat for deep-sea fishing without permission. I don't know if Bruce had any friends at the marina, but he was able to get the keys to open the locked gates meant to keep people away from the boats. Bruce always knew when the owners weren't around and didn't notice their boats were gone for the day. We always left them clean and well kept. Upon returning, we also filled the fuel tanks to the level they were at when we took the boat. So if someone found that a boat they had left fully filled suddenly only had a quarter tank, it might have raised suspicions. Likewise, if they had left the boat with less than a full tank, Bruce would carefully fill it up to that level. This should have been a red flag to me that Bruce was thinking a lot about how to cover up what was essentially a crime. It might not have been a big crime, but it was still a crime. Worse, I suspected there were times when Bruce had things that might have been taken from boats in the harbor. One day, we were on Bruce's father's boat, and Bruce suddenly had binoculars that I had never seen before. These were clearly expensive marine binoculars, not new, but in excellent condition. Bruce, being Bruce, always had an explanation ready. He said one of the garden owners had taken him on his boat, and when Bruce complimented him on his binoculars, the owner gave them to him. Well, what could I say? This could happen, even if it wasn't the most plausible explanation. When you hear the sound of hooves, you think of horses, not zebras. Another time, I witnessed Bruce selling a gun I had never seen before to a known lowlife from Fort Pierce. When I asked him about the deal, he said he was just an enterprising man who knew someone wanting to sell a pistol and also knew that this guy from Fort Pierce wanted to buy one. He simply made money on the difference between the purchase and sale prices. He was over 21 at this point, so a personal transaction was legal in Florida, but I still had my suspicions that Bruce would be willing to take something without asking if he thought he could get away with it. Friendship with Bruce had other benefits for a young guy like me. As the star of our football team, Bruce seemed popular with many girls. One afternoon, after a game against a Port St. Lucie team where Bruce scored 3 times, including the winning touchdown, he asked me if I wanted to have a night. I think he suspected that I was still a virgin and wanted to introduce me to the world of intim. I answered, of course, who wouldn't? He asked me to get some booze, tequila as I remember, and bring it to one of the local parks. I pulled out a bottle from my parents' supplies, and Bruce came with 2 girls. I already knew that Bruce preferred Latinas, so I wasn't surprised when the 2 girls he brought to the park were Connie Lopez and a girl named Eva, whose last name I don't remember. Both were Hispanic. Connie's family had fled Cuba, and Eva's family, as I remember, was of Mexican descent. Her father worked on a plantation, and her mother worked in a packing plant. Connie was quite famous in town, having been one of the varsity cheerleaders at Vero Beach High. Eva did not attend the same school. She might have gone to a Catholic school that served Vero in Fort Pierce, or she might have been working and not going to school. I wasn't interested and didn't ask. Bruce always claimed that Latinas were the best because they had big breasts, knew what they had to do, and would do anything to date popular guys. We sat on one of the benches in the park, far away from other people, and started making tequila shots the classic way: lime juice on hand, dip in salt, lick, and drink tequila. Of course, this was not high-end tequila. It was the kind my parents used for margaritas or other mixed drinks. After we had emptied most of the bottle, we went to one of the slightly shady hotels away from the beach, and I got a room. Thinking about it now, I often bought drinks and paid for rooms. It seems Bruce was taking advantage of me financially even then. As soon as we got into the room, Bruce turned on the radio to a salsa station, and the girls started dancing and stripping in front of us. It was really cute. Bruce told Connie to take care of me and show me how it's done while he took care of Eva. Once we were showered and dressed to leave, Connie held me until Bruce and Eva left. Then she told me the sad truth: "Dave, I want you to call me next week and find a time when we can have an intim again. Now listen to me carefully. Don't fall in love with me. Many men think they are in love with the first woman they had a night with. This is not love, this is attraction. You will have an intimate with many women, Dave. You are smart, handsome, and wealthy, and I will teach you how to have good night. You don't want to think that we're in love. I don't love you, and we have an expiration date. I like night and like having an intim with different men, so keep that in mind and don't be upset when it ends. I really like you, you're a good guy, better than Bruce. Don't be offended when I say it's over. Just find yourself a new girl and enjoy your youth and freedom. She was right, of course. We dated every weekend for about 6 weeks, and then she said she had taught me everything she could. We were finished. You know, Dave, I really value you, and if I weren't so available, I would want to marry you. You always treated me like a lady. We went on real dates, not like the idiots I usually date. I'd be happy just having an intimate, but let me remind you that I warned you we have a limit to our time together. It won't be difficult for you to find other women who want to try you. I told the girls at school about you, believe me, there are many who are interested. Don't be surprised if some of them approach you. She laughed at this. Now let me tell you what you don't want to hear. Bruce is not really your friend. He may have been in the past, but Bruce is a user, and in the end, he will use you too. I'm not saying to leave him, he can be fun, but don't trust him completely. If he really wants something, he won't hesitate to stick a knife in your back. I kept in touch with Connie until I left for college, but we never met again. Still, those words rang in my ears for years. In light of what seemed to be happening over time, I forgot Connie's warnings about Bruce. I never noticed Bruce doing anything against me, and over time, trust was restored. I had no reason not to trust him. Plus, shortly after Connie talked to me, Bruce, Pete, and I went to different colleges, and we only saw each other in the summer. We all worked during the summer, so our time was even more limited. Even after Bruce took over the gardening business from his father, everything seemed to be running smoothly. My dad and I often came to check on the garden, and we didn't know what Bruce was doing with the other gardens he managed. Instead of going out to dinner, I just ordered pizza. It was still before 9 p.m. when Claire returned home. As I walked through the house, putting away my purse and keys, I asked her how her day was, where she had dinner, who she saw, just the usual things we discussed at the end of the day. Pizza? I think my dinner was more interesting, she said with a smile. I was sure she was right. Then she came and sat on the couch next to me and asked the big question. Well, I hesitated for a moment before answering her. I think Bruce will end up in jail this time. My wife, Claire, was not from Vero Beach. She came from Southern California, south of Los Angeles, from Orange County. Claire didn't want to go back to live in Southern California. Too many crazy laws, too many rules, too high taxes. Altogether, they made California a much less attractive state. It's still a beautiful state with gorgeous beaches, great wine, mountains for skiing and hiking, and several wonderful national parks. Overall, a good place to visit, but no longer a place where you want to live. Middle Tennessee was perfect for her. I guess I'm lucky to have her. She came to Vanderbilt University to study. We met, started dating, fell in love, and eventually got married. But she didn't know all the people I grew up with. She knew Bruce and his wife from our frequent trips to Vero. What did he do to get arrested? She asked. That's the problem, I replied. I think he stole about $125,000 from the plantation's checking account and used it for his own purposes. I think it's called theft, but it's complicated by the fact that he had legal access to this money while it was being used for the plantation. Something else he seems to have done, and we'll know for sure in a couple of days, is that he sold the plantation's farm equipment to his friends who own other plantations. We think so, but they might claim he simply lent them the equipment for some legitimate reason. The sheriff's department is looking into it now. He then misrepresented his position by claiming that he had power of attorney to act on my behalf and forged documents to that effect. He tried to use this to get money from our main bank account, but it failed. So, I don't know for sure what to blame him for: attempted theft, fraud. The most important thing is selling our plantation, and we need more information on how he did it. I suspect we'll find out that he used a power of attorney to get real estate agents to cooperate with his actions. So, he clearly committed fraud and theft, and we'll find out what else. I have an unpleasant suspicion that we are only just beginning to understand the scale of his crimes. Wow, Claire exclaimed. And this is the man you thought was a friend? I had to look a little embarrassed. Yes, I thought he was a friend, but no friend betrays another like that. I once dated a woman named Connie Lopez who was also hanging out with Bruce. I remember she told me that he was a user and would eventually stab me in the back. I forgot about her warnings, but I think she was right all along. I'm so sorry, Dave, Claire said. I don't know what to tell you. I don't know either, I replied. But right now, I have to put my emotions aside and first try to fix as much of what happened as possible. Thank God George called Pete, and Pete had the good sense to call me and see if I knew what was going on. You know, this isn't some spontaneous decision. Bruce must have been planning this for a long time. I think he figured that when he lit the fuse, he would act so quickly that it would all be over before I knew it. We talked a little more, but without more facts to discuss, we were just going around in circles. So, Claire and I finally went to bed. We cuddled for a while, and I think she slept a little better than I did, but even she was restless. I lay there and planned what I needed to do the next morning. First thing in the morning was to make some calls. I called Bubba, and he gave me good news. The sheriff's agricultural theft unit had found 2 of the 3 tractors that Bruce had sold and had seized them pending my report of the theft. They were tracking down the 3rd tractor because Bubba remembered the last buyer's name. He had a plantation in the middle of the state off Highway 60, which crosses the state between Vero and Tampa Bay. They contacted the sheriff in that county, getting permission to work with them and seize the last tractor. That's about $110,000 worth of equipment that we won't have to replace. Bubba was also doing a quick inventory of other equipment to see if anything else was missing. He confirmed that our plantation workers had been paid. A quick call to the bank confirmed my suspicion that Bruce would not be coming back to try to cash out the main account. Finally, I called Pete and agreed to meet again for breakfast to discuss our status. I kissed Claire and got ready to leave, making sure she wouldn't be bored. Dave, I bought a couple of books with me to read and I have my laptop. I'll check with work to see if there's anything urgent that needs to be dealt with. Pete was already waiting for me at our little cafe for breakfast. The cafe didn't look modern or pretty, but the food was delicious, and it was a meeting place for local farmers. As I put a piece of sausage and avocado omelet into my mouth, I looked across the table at Pete and saw his eyes widen in panic. "Damn you, you miserable man," a voice said. I recognized the voice. It was another local farmer I went to school with. I wasn't close to him, he was on the football team, and Bruce was much closer to him. Matt was a big guy, about 6 feet 4 inches, and weighed over 250 pounds, maybe even 275 these days. He was strong. Back in high school, he could lift more than anyone on the football team, and there were big guys there. I didn't turn around or react, I just talked to him. "Hey, Matt, long time no see. What's got you so angry? Sit down and have a cup of coffee. I'll even pay." He sat down with us on Pete's side of the table, so he could look me in the face. Pete looked clearly uncomfortable. "You know what you did," Matt said, on the verge of screaming. The waitress, who knew us all, brought Matt a cup of hot, bitter black coffee. "I really don't know, Matt. So why don't you tell me? I bought this John Deere tractor with a front loader from you, and the sheriff's people came and accused me of stealing it and seized it." "Oh," I sighed, understanding now. "Well, Matt, there's just one problem with your story. I never sold you anything, and I never gave permission to anyone, including Bruce, to sell that tractor. He's your plantation manager, isn't he?" "He was, but our agreement," I explained, "that Pete drew up for us, limited his powers. He could not legally sell any of our farm equipment without my notice and permission." "He said he had your permission," Matt said. "So he lied," I replied. "How much did you pay for the tractor?" $20,000 in cash, he replied. "Let me get this straight. You paid $20,000 for a nearly new tractor that costs at least $160,000, and you don't think there's something wrong?" I knew he was giving me a great deal, but he said you were selling the plantation and just wanted to get rid of the equipment quickly and turn it into cash. "I'm sorry, Matt, but you were buying stolen property, and you'll probably lose your $20,000 if you don't find Bruce and get it back from him. Don't bet on it. I think he has already decided that Vero is not a healthy place for him." "Well, it's easy for you to say, it's not your money," Matt said. By this point, he was calming down, perhaps redirecting his anger. "Understand, Matt, he stole at least $25,000 from me and probably more that I haven't found yet. Bruce deceived all his old friends. Matt nodded his head. You know, Dave, he was a bit of a slimy guy back in high school. Sometimes things would disappear from people's lockers or their cars. Everyone thought it might be Bruce, but no one ever caught him in the act. In any case, the things that disappeared weren't expensive or important enough to make an official statement. I know what you're talking about. I often saw him do something suspicious, but I could never prove it was wrong, and he always had a story ready. Matt suddenly stood up. Where are you going, Matt? I'm going to look in a few places where Bruce might be hiding, the places where we hung out when we were young, got drunk, and had fun with women. Let me know if you find him. We exchanged phone numbers, and he promised he would let me know, but he didn't guarantee what condition Bruce would be in when I got there. Pete and I said goodbye as Matt left. Well, I asked Pete, I almost hope Matt doesn't find him. He could become food for the alligators, and all we'd find are his body parts in one of the irrigation canals. I agree, Pete said. I was grateful to Pete for coming with me to sort out the mess Bruce had created, but he was a lawyer and, although he was a friend, he charged money for his time. I wanted to make sure I was using him effectively and not wasting his time. It made sense to ask, what do we do now, Pete? Should we file a formal complaint with the sheriff's department? Not quite yet, he replied. This is a serious enough crime that I want one of the assistant district attorneys to be there when we file our statements. You understand that there will be several statements, don't you? Absolutely, I said. You go make sure there are no additional problems at the plantation, and I'll call you when I make an appointment at the sheriff's department. There's something else I want to do, he added. I have a paralegal who is tracking down the notary who signed the fake power of attorney. She's definitely involved in this scam. In fact, she may have helped Bruce create it. She may have seen more than one power of attorney, or if she's a lawyer herself, she might have access to templates to create them. Not that it was difficult, you can download templates online in 10 minutes. Anyway, I'm doing this because we need to include her in our statements. I thought that made sense. Okay, Pete. Call me whenever you want me to come to the sheriff's office. I'll go and check the plantation. We separated for a while. I didn't tell Pete, but I was going to visit the old plantation house where Bruce's family had lived to see if anyone was there. When I arrived at the plantation, Bubba had everything organized and running again. Luckily, it was too early in the year to harvest, so we mostly did the preparation. Bubba walked up to the rental car as I pulled up. Hey, boss. When will we get our tractors back? Honestly, I don't know yet. Pete and I are going to the sheriff's office later to sign statements. I don't know how long they'll want to keep them before returning them to us. Okay. We need them now. I was going to put the mower on the iota and cut the weeds again. I wanted to start with a row of Hamlin oranges because those will be the first ones we'll be collecting. Hamlin oranges were an early variety used entirely for juice. We talked about operational matters for about 15 minutes before I broached a sensitive topic. Bubba, did you have time to inspect the plantation and find out if anything was missing? Of course, boss. I think we're missing about 50 of the 60 harvest boxes. I know we're keeping score, and that's the difference between our score at the end of last season and today. Crap, I said. Bubba simply nodded in agreement. The missing plastic crates had the name of the plantation burned into them, so no one else could use them to pick and ship citrus fruit for processing. This meant whoever stole them intended to melt them back into the original plastic raw material. One $160 box of citrus crates cost us a little more than $160 each new. The most anyone could get for its plastic contents was about $118 a box. It was a huge loss for us, but if they were stolen, that's $9,500 of easy money, and it would have cost us over $13,000 to replace. This fell into the category of grand theft. Although we prevented the fraudulent sale of the plantation, the losses piled up. The good news was that if Bubba was right and nothing else was missing, we still had most of what we needed to keep the plantation running. Computers, business documents, and office equipment were still in the office. Bruce may have had his cell phone paid for by our plantation, but I was willing to bet it was either lying in a ditch or left somewhere for anyone to pass by. Which reminds me, I need to turn off this phone. I didn't want to pay for calls to Central or South America or some Caribbean islands. It took me about 5 minutes, and to my relief, it hadn't made any calls in the last week. Bubba changed the locks both on the gate and in the office to prevent late-night visits from five-finger discounters. My next visit could be difficult and even dangerous. I was heading through the plantation to the other side, where there was an old ranch house. This was the house where Bruce's family had lived. I might find the house empty, or I might encounter Bruce armed with a pistol or shotgun, so I took my .45 and put it in the car, somewhere easy to reach. As I drove up to the house that my grandfather originally built, I felt a pang of nostalgia. The outside of the house still had the same general appearance as when my family lived there. The walls were made of concrete blocks, painted a light beige, with a roof that peaked in the middle and sloped on all sides to a covered porch that wrapped around most of the house. Upon closer inspection, one could see that all the windows were new, double-glazed with UV protection to prevent the full force of the sun from heating up the interior. This gave them a mirror-like appearance, which also meant I couldn't see movement inside the house. Inside, the home had been completely remodeled and modernized 3 times. There was a modern kitchen that was part of an open plan with no walls between the kitchen, dining room, and family room. There were 4 bedrooms at the back of the house that I couldn't see from my angle. The bedrooms were originally part of the house, but there was a significant extension that more than doubled the original area, moving not only the bedrooms but also the games room and office to the rear. It was a nice place, and I have to admit that Bruce always kept it tidy. I pulled up to the front of the house, and before I even got out of the car, the door opened. It was Consuela, Bruce's Venezuelan wife. Yes, Bruce's taste in Latinas hadn't changed. There seemed to be no one else there, so I got out and stood next to the car, somewhat shielded behind the open door. Car bodies don't offer much protection from gunfire, but I could hide behind the engine block, which would be much better. Consuela saw me and walked over to where I parked. Consuela was a very attractive woman with almost shoulder-length black hair, wonderful breasts, an incredibly narrow waist, and not a flat, skinny butt but a fuller one, by no means fat, a little slimmer than Kim Kardashian. David, she pronounced my name with an accent. Consuela, I answered. I thought you were coming, she said, sounding rather depressed and sad. Bruce isn't here, you know, and it hasn't happened for more than a week. She sounded like she was about to cry. I don't know where he is. I wasn't completely surprised. If Bruce betrayed everyone else, why not betray his wife too? Come in, David. Sit down, we need to talk. I agreed. Consuela's family had immigrated to the United States when she was 12 years old, so her English and Spanish were perfect. She spoke English with a slight Spanish accent. She and Bruce had met while they were attending the University of Florida. She was pursuing a degree in general business, something that overlapped with Bruce's agricultural requirements. I wasn't entirely sure that Bruce had ever loved anyone other than himself, but I always thought Consuela was an exception. Now, I wasn't even sure of that. I wasn't sure what to think or how to approach Consuela. From my interactions with her, she seemed to be an honest person. She worked for Bruce's management company, handling the business side of the company while he took care of the plantation. She also helped liaise with packaging plants by acting as a translator, instructing the mostly Spanish-speaking crews on what they needed to do. We entered the ranch house, and I was still a little cautious, fearing that I was walking into an ambush. Consuela sat down at a small table in the kitchen with 2 chairs and motioned for me to take the other. There was an open bottle of wine on the table, as well as a half-full glass. It was still morning, too early to drink. She asked if I wanted to join her or if I preferred a soda or coffee. I asked for a diet soda, which she took out of the refrigerator. She looked at me directly and asked, with tears in her eyes, "What's going on?" I looked back at her and said, "I don't know." "Why don't you tell me?" "Bruce left a week ago, and I haven't heard from him since." She began to cry. "I don't know if he's alive or just hiding from me. I think he has some he's dating, so maybe he just left me and the boys to fend for ourselves." "Where are the boys?" I asked, thinking that even Bruce couldn't abandon his sons. "My parents have them until I figure out what to do next." "Fine. So why do you think Bruce might be dead?" It's a long story. Just start from the beginning. Consuela fell silent and took a deep breath. Then she took another long sip of wine and refilled her glass. It all started about 6 months ago. Bruce told me he had a plan that would make us rich. I asked him what he was thinking, and he said he couldn't say. Then I asked him directly if he was planning to do something forbidden. He laughed and assured me it had nothing to do with anything forbidden. I insisted he give me at least a hint of what he was planning. After all, it was about me and his sons. So he gave in and told me he was involved in a project to create large citrus and coffee plantations in Central America. The difference between these plantations and existing operations was that they would be modern, mechanized operations growing organic produce to supply the U.S. market at a cost comparable to non-organic produce grown here. He told me the reason he was keeping it a secret was that when the time came, we would close the business here and move to a ranch in Central America. He didn't even tell me which country. I had to keep it a secret because it was all classified. He said he was negotiating major funding from the local government for the project, but if word got out, the funding wouldn't materialize. It sounded corrupt, but he said that's just the way business is done there. He also didn't want to get fired from the plantations he ran here, because if they found out he was going to leave, they would find someone new sooner than he planned. He also said that he would need my help and cooperation to arrange all this. I didn't know what he meant, but I agreed to help him in any way I could. This made him very happy. She cried again but pulled herself together and continued the story. David, I'm so ashamed, but I promised Bruce I would do what he needed. It wasn't long after our conversation when, one evening, Bruce asked me to take the children to my parents because he was going to invite the bankers to talk about business and didn't want us to be interrupted. He brought these 2 men here, one older and one younger, both in nice suits, and we started drinking. They didn't seem to be talking about business so much as getting to know each other. I think they were from Panama, which is known for its bank secrecy laws but also for several major financial scandals. Bruce said they had a flight and were due to leave in half an hour. He asked them to excuse us, and we went to our bedroom. We were all pretty drunk by then. He told me to take off my clothes and put on thigh-high stockings and high heels. It disgusted me, but I did as he asked. Bruce left and returned to the living room, where he put on some salsa music. Then he called me to come out and dance for our guests. I was so ashamed, but I did as he asked and went out to dance for these men, without anything except for stockings and high heels. Finally, Bruce told me to go back to the bedroom and wait while he escorted our guests to their rental car. I could hear them talking, but I couldn't make out the words. It seemed like they were agreeing on a time to return to the States. Consuela took another sip of wine from her glass before speaking again. A distant look appeared in her eyes. 2 weeks later, Bruce told me the bankers would be back with documents for him to sign. I told him I didn't want to repeat what he made me do the first time. He said we really needed to work with these people and that they were counting on me to be good to them. Again, we had a couple of drinks while waiting, and I still told him no. He finally insisted that I take a pill to calm down, as he said. I took the pill, and my thoughts became a little foggy. He told me again that we would become rich if I just helped him. I finally said okay, I'd help. Right before a rental car with 2 guys pulled up, they walked up to the house, and Bruce let them in. He told me to take off their jackets and hang them in the hallway closet. I did it. Then Bruce made us all mix drinks, something with tequila. We raised a toast to our future success. By then, I was very relaxed and didn't worry about anything. He told me to put my thigh-high stockings and high heels back on, and I remember thinking, oh, I'm going to dance without clothes for these 2 guys again, but it didn't bother me anymore. I thought that if they wanted to see me without anything again, it wouldn't hurt anyone. I changed and returned to the living room, ready for the show. But when I came out, everything was different. Bruce turned on the salsa music, and I started dancing, but the 2 guys and Bruce stood up and came to me in a circle, starting to do the dance moves too. At that moment, I thought it was funny. I was dancing without anything with 3 dressed guys. Then Bruce told them they could touch me. I was so confused by the pill and the tequila that I didn't even protest. After that, they went to the table and started signing papers. Then they left. Bruce came back into the bedroom, hugged me, and told me I was the finishing touch to complete this part of the deal. He said I did what he needed me to do that night. Then he put me to bed, and we had a night. Consuela began to cry again and took another sip from her glass. At that moment, I realized that I was Bruce's pawn, used to obtain funds for his project, and he didn't even tell me exactly what he was doing. I think he lied to me when he said it wasn't substance-related. When I heard your car pull up, I expected it to be Bruce with more men that I would have to entertain. You know that we manage 4 different plantations here, yours and 3 others. The other owners are absent and only come here once or twice a year. I think they own the plantations as a tax deduction and only come here for vacation with their families, claiming it's a business trip. For the last 2 months, each of the remaining absentee owners has been coming to their plantations, each about 2 weeks apart. Bruce would bring them here, and we'd have a drink. He'd give me another pill to calm down, and then we'd all get without anything. I knew Bruce was using me as easy access to raise funds for his project. He hinted that maybe you would come too and that you and he could have a threesome with me, or maybe you could bring your wife and we could trade. He said it would be exciting to watch me and your wife have a night with each other. I've never done this with another woman. With you, perhaps I wouldn't mind too much, but with other men, they were old and nasty. She concluded, then last week, he said he had things to do and left. He never returned. He didn't call, he wasn't at the plantations. He abandoned us. I interrupted her monologue. He hinted to me that if I wanted to swap or have a threesome, we could do it, but I made it clear to him that Claire and I weren't interested. She nodded. I wasn't going to tell her what Bruce had done, but I wanted to warn her in general. As far as I know, Bruce is not involved in trafficking substances, but it appears he has committed several acts that could land him in serious legal trouble. So don't be surprised if people from the sheriff's department come to talk to you. We have officially terminated the contract with Bruce's company to manage our plantation, so you will receive a letter about this in the next day or 2. I saw a new round of panic in her eyes. This house belongs to you, and we were allowed to live here while we managed your plantation. Are you going to kick me and the kids out now that you fired Bruce? Don't worry. We may have to relocate you eventually, but if you're telling the truth and weren't involved in Bruce's latest actions, we'll take care of you and the boys one way or another. A couple more things. Do you have my phone number? She checked her phone and confirmed she had it. Okay, if Bruce shows up, call me. And one more thing, has Bruce ever mentioned the name of that woman you think he's dating? No, she replied, but I think she's from Central America, perhaps from Costa Rica. Well, call me if you find out anything else. Consuela stood up and hugged me. Thank you, David. You are one of the good men in this world. As I walked back through the plantation, no more than 2 minutes had passed when my cell phone rang. I looked at the screen and saw that Pete was calling. Pete, what's going on? Let's go to the sheriff's department. Teresa DVA, one of the assistant district attorneys, is going to meet us when we file charges. I'll be there in a minute. It took me about 15 minutes to get to the sheriff's office, and Pete was already standing outside waiting for me. Almost immediately, an official car pulled up, and a woman of about 35 got out. Teresa, meet Dave Stevens. Dave, meet Teresa DVA, one of the assistant district attorneys. We shook hands and exchanged pleasantries. Teresa was here at Pete's request to keep the prosecutors on the same page because there would be a lot of crimes and probably a lot of people that would be charged. Pete assured me that she was competent and tough on crime. Teresa agreed that it was a good idea to get her involved from the start. We then entered the sheriff's office together, where we were ushered into a conference room to lay out our charges against Bruce and currently unknown individuals for a number of crimes. Sheriff's deputies had already filed paperwork regarding the theft and fraudulent sale of farm equipment. Based on Bubba's statement, they had already seized 2 tractors sold locally, and a 3rd tractor was returning to Vero to be seized as evidence. Pete informed them that he had documentation proving that Bruce's powers were limited and he could not sell anything other than fruit from the plantation without special permission. I asked how long it would take to get the tractors back and was told it would take a couple of days to confirm our ownership records, numbers, and so on, found on the tractors, and to have a forensic scientist come to do a full set of photos as evidence. The deputy told me that some of the tractor buyers were considering filing a lawsuit against me to recover what they paid Bruce for the tractors. Sheriff's deputies on the scene said they were considering arresting them for receiving stolen property since it was obvious they only paid a fraction of what it was worth. I think that stopped talk of suing me. They would just have to accept that they paid Bruce. They have the option to file a complaint against Bruce for theft by deception. As for Bruce's actions at the bank, we could not charge him with theft for emptying the transaction account because he had the right to access that money. I was told later I could file a civil claim against him for a refund, but I wasn't holding my breath. They could accuse him of fraud and attempting to steal money from the main account using a false power of attorney. Finally, there was theft by selling the plantation. It was a little more complicated as to what charges would apply since we were preventing the actual transfer of the plantation, but preventing theft in the process does not erase the attempt. This ended our initial session, although we made it clear to the deputy that if we found additional crimes, we would return. D. Silva thanked us for the information and suggested that when the documents reached the prosecutor's office from the sheriff, they would likely add a few additional charges. Then she returned to the office. I had a feeling that it didn't matter what charges were brought because Bruce wasn't going to wait around to be arrested. I expected him to sell his truck and cover his tracks while we ran around in circles figuring out exactly what he did. A new identity, a new location, hundreds or even thousands of miles away, he would disappear. Additionally, at this point, all of his crimes were property crimes and did not have as high a priority as other crimes such as murder, assault, or kidnapping. There won't be multi-layered all-point bulletins, and even if there are, there won't be police briefings for the guys on the streets for more than a day or two. Unfortunately, there are too many other serious crimes. I followed Pete to our next stop, Andy Lopez's real estate agency, Properties by Andy. Both Pete and I had met Andy at various events, although we were not friends, more like casual acquaintances. When we entered his office, we were greeted by a young, well-dressed woman, clearly a salesperson. She smiled, greeted us, and was only slightly disappointed to learn that we were not looking for real estate but had come to see Andy. Andy came out, and when he saw Pete, he rolled his eyes and said, "Pete, what a mess." "Sorry about that, Andy, but it was very good for you that we were able to prevent a fraudulent transaction." "Yes, you're right. Let's go to my office. Would you like to get coffee?" We agreed, and he called the young agent, who was in the room. "Carolyn, can you bring 3 coffees and a tray to my office?" We sat down and chatted for a bit. Andy asked Pete about his family and vice versa, and he asked me about mine. Since we no longer lived in Vero, I told him about Claire and the kids. Carolyn brought a cart with 3 coffee mugs and all the accessories. I took a couple of sweeteners for mine, Pete added cream and sugar, and Andy drank his black. Almost immediately after we finished making coffee, a young woman entered the office. She was 24 or 25 years old. Andy introduced her as his daughter, Estella. She was holding a stack of documents in her hands. "Hi Pete, nice to see you again. I really wanted this deal to go through, though, $5 million for the plantation. Well, Dad asked me to make copies of all completed documents for you." "Thank you, Estella. Make sure the originals are kept together and in a safe place. They will almost certainly become evidence, and prosecutors will want the originals, not copies." She sat down in an extra chair. To be honest, Pete, everything seemed legit to me. He told me that Dave's family wanted to sell the plantation, and I knew that Jake Steer had been hunting for this land for years, so I accepted the order. Before he even showed up in the MLS, I called Jake, and he came here and signed the offer that same day. She pulled out her copy of the certified power of attorney and handed it to Pete. I thought it gave Bruce authority to act on behalf of Dave's family. That's what he usually does, you know, he buys the fertilizer, he hires the pickers, and he runs the packing plants. This wasn't a complete surprise. A lot of the groves closer to the beach are being sold to developers. I think 3 have been sold in the last 6 months alone. There was something she said that tickled my brain, but I couldn't put my finger on it at the time. In any case, Andy and his daughter assured us that the deal fell through and never made it to the MLS. However, Estella looked a little thoughtful. I asked her what she was thinking about. With one of those "that's not very funny" laughs, she said, "Do you realize that a 6% commission for listing and selling real estate, or even just a 3% listing commission, would make my year?" Here's my new car." Yes, I agreed, mentally calculating the commission from $150,000 to $300,000. However, Estella had another thought as she silently said to herself, "That son of a, I let him take me, and now it all disappears. I'm finished again." We left the office and found another place where Bruce had left a trail of problems behind him. Since it was getting late, Pete went home, and I returned to the family cottage on the island. There, I found Claire waiting for me. "How did it go?" she asked. "Well," I replied, "we are correcting the situation as best we can, but I think we're short $125,000, or more accurately, $124,950, from the transaction account because he had legal access to it. There will be enough other charges against him that, if or when he gets caught, he will end up in jail for a long, long time." I also stopped and saw Consuela. She says she hasn't seen or heard from Bruce in a week. He told her about some project that was supposed to make them rich from a ranch somewhere in Central America. She claimed she never knew the details and seemed terrified that he was going to get involved in pills and they would end up as slaves to the cartels. My guess is that over the last 6 months or so, Bruce has been selling it to potential business partners and prospective investors, forcing her to please her bankers and have threesomes with some of his other clients. She seemed rather disgusted with herself for giving in and doing it, but you know how Bruce is. He promised her the moon and placed the guilt on her, saying that if she didn't agree, the failure of his project would be her fault. He used substances. At this point, Claire interrupted me. "Dave," she said, "I never told you this before, but before we got married, Bruce suggested that you, me, and him could have a threesome. He claimed it would be the best night I'd ever had and implied that after the first time, we could do it again in the future. In fact, he even suggested that once we were married, we could switch places. When we were here in Vero, I was horrified and disgusted that a man who was one of your best friends would do such a thing. I never told you because I was sure he was drunk at the time and because he was a close friend. The next day, I don't think I remember what he said, and he acted normally again, so I didn't pay much attention to it. But I don't know if you noticed that I always kept my distance from Bruce. I always stayed by your side if we needed to be together. I did notice this but attributed it to some instinct that told me Bruce was not being entirely honest and was perhaps too flirtatious and touchy-feely, more than most women would be comfortable with. I stayed with him because, like his father before him, he was a good Grove manager. This new discovery only increased my anger and sense of betrayal. He may have been drunk, but I'm sure he knew and remembered every word he said. Perhaps he thought he had planted the seed of an idea in her head that she might act upon in the future. He definitely didn't know my wife as Connie Lopez told me years ago. Bruce is not, and never has been, my friend. I changed the subject and told Claire that we were going to dinner with Pete and his wife, Brenda. Brenda was one of the women in Vero whom Claire loved very much. Being able to have dinner and chat with her was a nice opportunity. "But keep in mind that you and Pete are not doing business today," I added. "I agreed," Claire said. "Pete told me Brenda had gotten the same promise from him, and we had a nice dinner together at one of the great seafood restaurants close to the ocean. The seafood was straight off the dock, as fresh as it could be, and the chefs had spent years perfecting their craft. I had to admire what they did. When I tried to cook seafood at home, I never did it as well. Like most of the year, it's warm in Florida, so we took a walk on the beach. At this time of year, the insects weren't too bad, and the weather had cooled down from the summer heat, so it was nice to walk along the beach listening to the sound of the waves. For me, it brought back memories of my teenage years in Vero with friends. But like Jesus and George Washington, I had to deal with my Judas, my Benedict Arnold. Back at the beach house, Claire and I got ready for bed, and when I pulled back the sheets and saw Claire without clothes while waiting for me, I knew I was in for a good evening. We made love, and then I wanted to talk to Claire about Consuela. "Claire, have you ever wanted a threesome or anything else that Consuela was forced to do?" She smiled. "Dave, let me take care of a couple of these things. I think we all have fantasies at times, but that's all they're, fantasies. First, I'll say this about women, I've had a few women hit on me for intim in my life, although not since we got married. I think I look too happy and too content with my life with you for them to even feel like trying. I tried to kiss another girl when I was, maybe 14. In the end, kissing another girl didn't appeal to me at all. We tried it once, and although she wanted to try it again after the first kiss, I wasn't interested at all. Now, about a threesome with another man, that's a little different. I suspect most women fantasize about it at some point in their lives, but their fantasies are not the same as men's. Then she turned to me. Did you ever have a threesome with Bruce when you were younger? Claire knew about some of the intimate adventures I had been involved in years before I met her. No, Bruce and I often had night with our women in the same room, but it was for money. We only had enough money for one room, but we never had threesomes or swapped the women we were with. There have been a couple of times when one of us has stopped seeing a particular woman, then the other one might have courted her, but it wasn't a swap in the same room on the same night. If Bruce was having some kind of threesome at the time, they weren't with me. Claire paused briefly before moving on to a slightly different topic. Have you ever fantasized about a threesome? Of course, I said. My threesome fantasies were always with two women. There were a couple of times in college when I thought I could get close to it, two women at the same time, but something always got in the way and it never happened. You know how one of the drunk girls I was about to bring to my room started vomiting on herself and the other girl? That quickly stopped any thoughts of intim. They both left me and went back to their room to wash up. I laughed, remembering this. Have you ever thought about asking me to have a night with you and some other man? No, Claire said. For many reasons, I just never imagined it. First of all, ever since I met you, I've been so obsessed and jealous of you that I would probably kill any man I found having an intim with you. I'm just too possessive. The second reason is that asking for intimate with someone else, even if we never do it, would hurt your feelings and make you lose trust in me. I couldn't stand it. Well, at least you got the answer right, Claire said with a laugh. I thought for a moment. I think that's why Consuela feels so betrayed and abandoned right now. When Bruce started treating her like his personal escort and acting as her pimp, it showed her that he didn't love her the way she loved him. Then why do you think she did this? I asked. I think for several reasons. Latino women are often taught in their culture that they should do what their husbands ask and want from them. This usually doesn't apply to things like exposing themselves to other men, because most Latino men, like me, are too macho to let other men have their wives. Remember how she thought Bruce was dating another woman? For her, it was a way to prove to him that she, and not some other woman, was the right one for him. I could be completely wrong, of course. Claire and I talked a little more about other things until she fell asleep. I, on the other hand, couldn't sleep, thinking about the latest events. The next morning, Claire and I were having breakfast again when the phone rang. It was Pete. Dave, am I interrupting? No, just finishing breakfast. I wanted to update you with the latest information I found. Remember how we thought the notary who signed those powers of attorney was part of a scam? Well, I found her, not where she is now, but where she was. She worked as an assistant and notary for another real estate company here in town. She was a messenger for agents, doing paperwork around the county, minor clerical work, and so on. She recently received her state notary certificate but stopped showing up for work about a week ago. Her name was Claudia Rivera, but we did a little background check and found that she may have had a suspended conviction that was expunged after her probation was completed, under the name Claudia Riva. Can you guess what she was convicted of? Forgery? Oh yeah. One more thing, she wasn't Costa Rican, she was Panamanian. People think she was seeing Bruce on the side. Incredible, I agreed. Have you reported this to the prosecutor's office? I'm calling from my car because I'm on my way to deliver the documents we collected to them. Great, Pete. I think I'll visit Bruce's parents and see if they know where he is or what he's up to. Okay, just let me know what they say. I don't expect them to know much because Bruce wouldn't tell them. You know his parents are as honest as they come. Yes, I know. It's unlikely, but I'll try anyway. We'll talk later. I was on speakerphone, so Claire heard our conversation. I stood up and leaned over to kiss her. Don't bother getting up, finish your breakfast, I told her. Okay, honey. Good luck. As I drove to Bruce's parents' house in one of the local retirement communities, I wondered what could have gone wrong that Bruce had become out of control and ruined his future. His company seemed to be thriving, and so did his wife and children, at least until he decided to ruin everything. What had changed? Was this related to the new mistress he took on? Was it worth all this expense? I didn't think so. Bruce had never been faithful to one woman, and I didn't think that would change. Maybe someday I would meet her and understand what he saw in her, although most likely, I would see her in an orange prison jumpsuit. When I pulled up to the little house and parked in the driveway, Bruce's parents, Jim and Maggie, came out to greet me. The cottage was nice and built quite recently, about 10 years ago. It was probably new when they bought it in this over 55 community. Maggie came up to me and hugged me tightly. "Dave, it's so nice to see you." Jim shook my hand and invited me inside. They offered me coffee and Maggie's homemade blueberry muffins, but I declined, saying that I had just had breakfast before arriving. We chatted a bit. They asked about my parents, how they were doing, and how work was going on the ranch. I asked about their life in the retirement village and whether they were enjoying being grandparents. After a while, they looked at me, knowing why I had come. "Dave, a deputy came by yesterday asking about Bruce's whereabouts. As he put it, we should have told him the same thing we're telling you. We don't know and haven't heard from him in about 2 weeks. It's not that unusual. He doesn't call us all the time and doesn't come often, even though we live only 5 miles from the Grove." It sounded a little sad, but it's not that unusual these days for kids to ignore their parents as they get older. "Did anything happen to cause Bruce to change so dramatically?" I asked. Jim answered, "Well, he was diagnosed about 6 months ago." "What was it?" I asked. Maggie replied, "It wasn't multiple sclerosis or Parkinson's. No, he was diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease, or ALS as it's called now. Since no one remembers Lou Gehrig anymore. What could be said?" I said. "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that." I knew little about ALS but remembered that the course of the disease was usually 3 to 5 years, although with recent treatments, it could last up to 10 years. This is a terrible condition where your body deteriorates before your eyes. You gradually lose the ability to eat and eventually breathe and die from suffocation. I thought knowing that the future would be so bleak might have untethered him from his moral compass, although I wasn't sure Bruce was ever committed to what most of us consider the straight and narrow path. We talked a little about Bruce's condition, and one piece of the puzzle fell into place. His parents told me that about 6 weeks ago, he mentioned he was going to start fulfilling his bucket list and that they might not hear from him often. When they asked what was on his bucket list, he mentioned a 2-week trip to Hawaii, maybe Fiji or Samoa, hunting brown bear in Alaska or lion in Africa, and visiting places in Europe where he had never been. Nothing specific, just ideas. At the time, his parents, who were about 75 years old and still in good physical condition, spoke of sadness that their child would die before them. They said they took comfort in the fact that they would still have Consuela and their grandchildren. I couldn't help but chuckle when I heard this. I felt that Consuela might take the children and leave Vero to forget the memories of Bruce. As I was leaving, Jim said to me, "You know, we didn't raise him like that. I would never steal from the people who entrusted me with their property and livelihood." "I know that, Jim. I've always considered you and Maggie to be paragons of decency. Thanks for talking to me. At least now I know what might have pushed him." As I got into my car, I noticed a message from the sheriff saying I could pick up my tractors. I knew Bubba needed them at the Grove, so I headed straight to the parking lot and called Bubba to meet me there with one of the other Grove workers. Bubba was standing at the entrance to the parking lot with a sheriff's deputy when I arrived. The first thing we did was inspect the tractors for damage and check the VIN numbers to make sure they were the same tractors that were stolen from the Grove. It was them. Then I had to pay for their release, $135 per day. 2 tractors had been there for 2 days, and the third one for 1 day, totaling $675 just to have my stolen property parked in a county lot. The manager laughed when I complained. "Dave, just be glad you're paying for farm equipment. If they were cars, they'd cost $1,150 a day. The county sets the rates and gives a discount for the farm guys." I thanked him and told him I understood, but that didn't stop me from complaining a little. When the paperwork was completed, Bubba, one of our employees named Raul, and I drove the tractors back to the Grove. Yes, tractors are allowed to drive on county roads, albeit slowly, which caused traffic to back up behind us. The drivers cheered as we turned into the driveway of the Grove. We parked the tractors so Raul and his team could quickly check them for oil in the engines, fuel in the tanks, and such. Then they would go out to work in the Grove again. Bubba took one of the trucks and drove me back to the lot where I picked up my rental car. As I walked to the car, a sheriff's deputy stationed in the parking lot beckoned to me. The report on your tractors says Bruce McWilliams was the suspect in the theft. I nodded in agreement. I just heard on the radio that one of our patrols pulled over his truck here in town about an hour ago. They pulled him over, and when they got to the cab, there was a 19-year-old guy behind the wheel. He was on his way to the DMV to change the registration to his name. Looks like this McWilliams sold it to him yesterday afternoon. The guy and his dad took a couple of weeks to arrange the loan. They transferred the money yesterday, and he signed the title transfer. We just let the guy go to complete the registration. Just thought you might be interested. I sighed quietly. Another possible way to track Bruce had slipped through our fingers. Although I didn't expect anything different, this truck probably brought in another $125,000 for Bruce. He would collect as much cash as possible and then try to disappear. When I called Pete, he already knew about the truck. Yes, Teresa, that assistant prosecutor, called me to let me know. But it was a legal transaction, so nothing can be done. She is on guard, though. Just for fun, she went into the DMV database and found Claudia Rivera's Toyota Camry. At least her license plate is on the cops' radar now, but her car isn't like Bruce's truck, no flashing neon light. I think her car is a brown four-door sedan, the kind of car that no one pays attention to. He'll probably show up at some point, but let's hope it's sooner rather than later. Of course, we're just speculating about her at the moment. She might not have anything to do with Bruce's scams at all, but I doubt it. After I hung up, I headed back to the cottage on the island. I thought Claire and I would have dinner there that night and then fly back to our home in Tennessee in a couple of days. I couldn't think of anything useful to do at the moment. Everything was in the hands of the police and the prosecutor's office. When I arrived and was just getting out of the rental car, Claire ran out of the house. "Dave, Consuela just called." She sounded like she was on the verge of panic. She seemed scared for some reason. "She couldn't reach you, said your phone was busy and didn't go to voicemail. She asked that you call her back ASAP." I went into the house before calling her back. "David," she whispered as if afraid she might be overheard. "Those bankers, or whoever they are, from Panama called half an hour ago. They said their plane had just landed in Miami and that they would take a car and come here tonight. I told them Bruce wasn't here and I didn't know where he was, but they said it didn't matter. They said Bruce told them to come and that I would show them a good evening. The Panamanian said Bruce mentioned Intim with me, and they are looking forward to the same. He said they have pills to make it the best night of my life, and the boys are with me tonight. What should I do?" I quickly thought about the situation. "Give me a minute to make a couple of calls, and then Claire and I will come to the ranch, okay?" She said, "But hurry up." My first call was to Pete. "Pete, do you have the number for that assistant prosecutor?" "Yes. She's probably already left the office, but I have her personal number." I told him about the call from the Panamanian bankers. "I think it will take them about 2 hours to get here from Miami. That's what I'm proposing, but it will take someone with a little influence over the sheriff." I shared my plan with Pete, and he said he would contact Teresa and they would be ready. Claire and I got back into the rental car and drove to the ranch. I saw Consuela peeking out from behind the curtain to make sure it was us before opening the door. When she opened it, relief was visible on her face. Claire walked to the door, and they hugged. Consuela was so happy to see us. "Consuela," I said in a soothing but insistent voice, "get your boys together and take them to Bruce's parents for the night. They'll be glad to have them, and I think Bruce hasn't taken the kids to them for a long time. Claire will take them there. You and I will stay here and deal with the men from Panama." "But David, I'm scared. I want to leave too." I quickly hugged her to calm her down. "We won't be alone, and we need you here to identify these men as the ones who were here before. Don't worry, you will be safe. I pulled out my Walther PPQ.45, a pistol with a 12-round magazine and one in the chamber for a total of 13 rounds if needed. I didn't expect to use it, but I wanted to be prepared. I tried to calm Consuela and explain that I didn't think they would arrive for at least an hour. I asked her to heat up the leftover ropa vieja we ate and gave her a shot of tequila to calm her nerves. I didn't drink myself because I wanted to be sober in case something went wrong. Then we turned on the TV at low volume. Almost an hour had passed since I thought it was when we heard a car approaching the house. I told Consuela what to do and how to behave. She was wearing casual clothes, nothing nicely. I locked the screen door, and Consuela stood behind it. I stood out of sight behind her and to the side so that if necessary, I could be nearby. The men got out of the car. It was obvious they had already had a drink before arriving. Consuela shouted at them, "What do you want? What are you doing here? Hola, chica. Are you ready to party tonight? We will have a fiesta together. We have pills for you. Let's make you very happy." "No, we won't have any fiesta. Get back in the car and go back to where you came from." They began to behave aggressively. "No, no, no. Bruce sold you to us for the night. You're our society girl tonight. Don't worry, you'll still be ready for more intimate in the morning." "Are you threatening me?" she asked. "I told you to leave. I won't be anyone's society girl tonight or ever. Call the police if you want, but we're not leaving until we get what we want." "Are you threatening me?" she asked again. "I told you to leave, or I'll call the police." "Pinch, pisha," was the response. Suddenly, the lanterns surrounding them lit up. They tried to return to the car, but two Vero Beach patrol cars blocked their path. "This is the police. You are under arrest. Place your hands on your head. Do not make sudden movements or reach for anything." The Panamanians obeyed as if they had done this before. They were soon ordered to kneel and then lie down on the ground. Within minutes, they were handcuffed while dogs and police searched their car. They had already admitted to having illegal pills, which gave rise to a search. In addition to the substances and guns found during a search of their bodies, enough was found in the car to be classified as distribution. They were arrested when officers found several firearms in the car. That was the finishing touch. They were taken to the county jail for questioning. D. Silva approached the house while the arrests were taking place. "Have you had enough of this excitement, Mr. Stevens, Mrs. McWilliams?" Consuela answered first, "More excitement than I need in my entire life." I was more cautious and pragmatic. "Can you hold them off while you figure out what their role was in Bruce's scam?" "Oh, of course. We were going to detain them as witnesses, as you suggested. But now," she looked back at the specs and shrugged. "Now we have substance and weapons charges against them. Believe me, when they realize how long they can sit, one or both will start talking about Bruce. We'll find out what they were really doing when dealing with him," she said and turned away. "Good night, guys." I arranged for one of the deputies to take Consuela and me to her mother-in-law's, where she was reunited with the boys, and I was reunited with Claire, who was waiting there. We said our goodbyes, and Claire and I headed back to the island. It took several more days to reorganize our activities in Florida before we could return home. We promoted Bubba to official Grove manager with a salary increase. I figured he was already doing most of the work with Bruce coming in from time to time to make final decisions. Since Bruce's company went out of business, we hired Consuela to take on additional duties that Bruce had previously performed. After harvesting the crops and sending them to either the packing house or the juice plant, it was her job to ensure the process was completed. We sold the produce from our headquarters in Tennessee, but Consuela had to ensure that the fresh fruit was palletized, wrapped in plastic film, and that brokers arranged for the product to be trucked from the plant to the end customers. Our products were high quality because we did not harvest them until the sugar-to-acid ratio reached the level consumers desired. This meant a score of 21 or higher for oranges and at least 11 for grapefruits. Bubba had to ensure that the fruit was not picked until it was completely ripe, which was a problem with Florida citrus, especially grapefruit. Another of Consuela's responsibilities was managing our pride and joy, our juice line. We no longer sold our juices wholesale, we had our own brand. We were considered a premium brand because not only was our juice NFC, not from concentrate, but all the fruit was real Florida fruit, whereas our competitors added cheap fruit from Brazil, Mexico, or Central America to bulk up their juice. We sold our line of juices to high-end stores, many in New York and Washington, as well as upscale restaurant suppliers. We also shipped a significant amount to our warehouse in Tennessee for sale throughout the state and surrounding areas. We couldn't grow all the fruit we needed to produce juice in our own groves, so Consuela also had to source juice from other producers. We had several reliable suppliers who sold all their juice to us. By hiring Consuela for these tasks, we also put her under Claire's control, so I was out of the process. Claire knew there would be no flirting, and Consuela knew I wouldn't treat her the way Bruce did. Back home, Claire and I went about our business. In addition to the groves, we processed produce from my father's ranch and a few select local farmers. Over the years, we began distributing fresh vegetables and berries grown on farms in central Tennessee. Our employees did a good job in our absence, but there were always tasks that required our personal involvement. However, that didn't mean we didn't hear more about Bruce and his antics. About 2 weeks after we returned home, Pete called one morning to say that law enforcement had found Claudia Rivera's Toyota parked, presumably abandoned, in the long-term lot at Miami International Airport. She and Bruce, on a Panamanian passport, and Bruce on an American one, took a commercial flight to the Dominican Republic. After that, their trace disappeared. No one expected to see them again in the USA. It later became known that Bruce was able to sell 3 other groves to his clients. Developer Jake Steer handled the transactions legally because his clients, being out-of-area owners with little involvement in the management of the groves, gave Bruce legal powers of attorney. They did this many years ago and never had a problem before, but several months passed before anyone thought to call the previous owners to ask if they really wanted to sell the groves. The only consolation was that 3 grove owners sued Steer and locked up his money and land long enough for him to declare bankruptcy. However, the owners never got their money or groves back. In the end, Bruce stole less than $130,000 from us, including everything, but he walked away with millions from sales of other groves. Tracing the money was nearly impossible. First, it went to a bank in Panama. Yes, those scoundrels who came to the ranch and were still in Florida State Prison for pills and weapons were indeed Panamanian bankers. They carried out their part of the scam, then the money disappeared into accounts first in Costa Rica, then it moved to the Cayman Islands. Who knows how many times the money was transferred from one place to another, but eventually, the trail disappeared, leaving the former owners of the groves to cry over their lost possessions. They may have been able to claim some of the money back as a loss on their tax returns, but I'm not sure about that. I received a call from a gentleman in New Jersey who owned one of the groves, wondering if I had been able to obtain more information about Bruce's whereabouts. He also asked how our grove escaped Bruce's illegal activities while others did not. I told him it was partly luck, combined with the fact that I grew up in Vero and a lot of people knew me. When something seemed strange, local friends would call me. He was very polite, but I felt a bad vibe even over the phone. He asked me to call him if I found any new information about Bruce. I took his number and said I would. The former owners of the groves weren't the only ones keeping their eyes open for Bruce. Nothing else happened for more than 2 years. Then, I received a call from Consuela. She had heard from her Latino friends that Bruce was now very sick and in the advanced stages of ALS, but was still healthy enough to take care of himself. It was said that he traveled to Canada to enter their national health care system for long-term care as his condition deteriorated. Trying to cheat the system again, such a vague rumor wouldn't have done any good if it weren't for the fact that someone had overheard the conversation and mentioned the name of a hotel in a small town near Quebec City. After consulting with Claire, and although she thought it would be pointless after all these years, I made arrangements to go to Canada. I was going to confront Bruce, assuming that the rumor had some basis and that it was, in fact, Bruce. 2 days later, I arrived at the hotel and asked about a man who I thought might have been staying there. The hotel manager was very concerned about the privacy of his clients, but the pair of Ben Franklins in the palm of his hand not only confirmed that such a person was staying at the hotel but also gave me the key to his apartment. He was at dinner when I arrived but was expected back in an hour. I was sitting in the dark when the door opened and the tenant came in. At first, he didn't notice me, but when he turned on the light, he suddenly saw me. I scared him. God, David, you scared the crap out of me. Hi Bruce, it's been a long time. Bruce sat down in the second chair opposite me. Dave, you look good, he remarked. Bruce, you look like crap, if you don't mind me saying so. Bruce looked thin and haggard, about 20 years older than he was. Yeah, Bruce sighed. It sucks. It really does. According to the doctors, I probably only have a year or maybe 2 if I'm lucky. This is what ALS does to you. Even now, I have to eat soft food, a lot of soups and baby food. But at least I can feed myself. I don't know when, but I will probably need a feeding tube. Thankfully, Canada's National Health Service will keep me until the end without my paying. I don't know. I told him, it seems the NHS is trying to convince anyone with a terminal condition to let them put them to sleep. I've heard about it too. I'm not sure that when it gets this bad, I can just go along with it, let them stuff me full of happy pills, just fall asleep, and never wake up. Bruce changed the subject. So, are you here to grab me to hand over to the authorities, to squeeze this turnip until it bleeds? No, absolutely not. You didn't get much from us. We have restored and repaired most of what you did, I replied. And what? Bruce asked with genuine curiosity. I just want to hear the reason for all this from your own lips. Do you want to record my confession to reproduce what I say in some court? No. Honestly, I want to know why you betrayed and backstabbed every friend you knew since childhood. I want to understand how you could make your parents feel ashamed and sorry for all their lifelong friends. I want you to tell me why you first abused your wife's trust and honor and then abandoned her and your boys, simply leaving them alone. Bruce chuckled quietly. You're not asking for much, are you? Okay, I'll tell you and explain it the way I see it. But it's a long story and it goes back a long time. I nodded. I have plenty of time. Bruce laughed again. Probably more than me. Suddenly, Bruce became more serious. He leaned back in his chair, relaxed, tilted his head back, and closed his eyes, then began to speak. One day, I looked up the definitions of a psychopath and a sociopath. I'm not sure which category I fall into, or maybe I'm somewhere in between. I'm not sure there's a clear distinction between the two. I think it started when I hit puberty. I remember thinking that rules are for fools, and I thought of all you virtue as its own reward types as fools, including my parents. I realized that I needed to keep my mask on and hide the real me from the world. If I did that, I could get away with almost anything until the very end when I hit the jackpot. That was my only rule: be smart, don't get caught. Most of the time, I was stupid and impulsive. If I saw something I wanted, I just took it. But at some point, I realized that if I continued doing this, I would eventually get caught. That's when I realized I needed a plan, my own set of rules, not to conform to the demands of society, but only for my own protection. I called this my number one concern. First of all, don't be greedy. If I were to find a woman's jewelry box, I wouldn't take the most expensive piece of jewelry or the truly unique piece, and God forbid any heirloom piece. I would take a set of gold earrings or maybe a gold ring with a couple of small jewels, things that could take months or even years before they are missed. If they were missed, people would think they had lost them and simply wouldn't be able to do anything about it. They would only have vague memories of them. They'd just gotten lost, and it was easy to get rid of them because they were nondescript. Remember that gun you found when I was selling it from my house in Fort Pierce? This was an example. The gun was in a box on one of the boats in the harbor, tucked in the back of a drawer covered with some shirts where people wouldn't see it unless they were looking for it. I could tell the owner of the boat had not used it for a long time. I don't know if he ever knew it was gone. If he looked for it, he wouldn't even remember what he did with it and would think he moved it and just couldn't remember where he put it. You almost caught me that time. I didn't expect you to show up later, and the gun has long since disappeared. I know you were suspicious at that moment, but I had my story, and you still gave me the benefit of the doubt. I don't want to sound like I'm bragging, but I fooled you all and had a good time with women. This is a completely separate topic. I could pull women's panties off, of course. You know I've always been attracted to Latinas. Even after I got married, I never stopped sleeping with other women. Sometimes I would portray some of the boys' mothers. Remember Matt from the football team? I did this a couple of times with his mom. She liked it. She wasn't Latina, but she still let me do whatever I wanted. She was one of the original cougars and just loved being teased. God, they were so easy to manipulate. Consuela was different. She was smart, and I wanted to have children, so I treated her differently. I married her, which convinced her that I loved her. I mean, she still allowed me to have everything I wanted, but I imposed restrictions on myself. Until the end, she was just another woman I lived with and could have at any time I wanted. Then disaster happened. I've always been coordinated and in great shape, so when I started having problems with my balance and strength, I knew something was wrong and went to the doctor. He referred me to a specialist, who tentatively diagnosed me with ALS. The final diagnosis, he said, would take time, but I knew in my gut that he was right. It was a death sentence, and there was little that could be done. Medicines do not add years to life, only months. I was told that realistically, I had 3 to 5 years before my body would shut down and I would suffocate because my lungs could no longer breathe. I guess that's what made me furious. Bruce fell silent for a full minute after these words. I told my parents but asked them not to tell anyone, not even Consuela, about the diagnosis until we were sure. I had already been sleeping with Claudia for 6 months before I found out about my ALS. Claudia was a nymphomaniac, if such a thing exists, and she was so perverted that even I was amazed. The idea of selling the groves came to her first. I mentioned that I had powers of attorney from the owners of the 3 groves I managed, and she started making plans. How much? She asked. Could I get for selling these groves? She worked for a real estate agency and knew some developers who were trying to buy land to build houses in the area. Through her, I met Jake Steer. We sat down and started discussing pieces of land that I could control. He thought he could raise about $115 million from investors to buy the land if I sold all 3 properties. At that time, we didn't even consider your grove because I knew that you had a long-term plan for its development. Even then, I was hesitant because if I did it, it would be a one-time deal with no possibility of return. Then she hooked me. See, I didn't tell my wife about my ALS, but I did tell Claudia. Claudia argued that there are treatments in Europe that the FDA prohibits in the United States. But outside the US, treatment is available in countries like her native Panama. They are not as strictly regulated, or perhaps it's more accurate to say that no one pays attention to regulations or officials can be bribed to turn a blind eye to the rules. In other words, she gave me hope. She said she knew some Panamanian bankers she went to university with who were experts at laundering questionable money and that Panama had the same strict confidentiality rules as Switzerland. She said she could get them to come to us so we could work out our plan. When they arrived, we all had dinner together, and although no one spoke of the money as dirty or stolen, everyone understood that it would be so. Maybe they thought it was money from substances or something like that, but they didn't care. We started by transferring money to the Cayman Islands, then it moved to Costa Rica, then to Jersey or the Channel Islands off the English coast, and finally back to Panama, where it would become clean and available. I mean, who would have thought that the island of Jersey was a major banking center? But apparently, it is. That night, after dinner, we had some drinks, went back to the hotel, and Claudia served us all. After all this, she was ready to go to the bar and find new men. Crazy, right? I persuaded her not to do this. The next day, when the Panamanian bankers left for Panama, they also took $110,000 of my money to make me a Panamanian passport, which they did, a real one with my photo and a different name. I haven't used it in a couple of years, but I still have it somewhere. I still had a bucket list of things I wanted to accomplish before I died, but now I expected to do them with a ton of money. Claudia was never satisfied. I had true powers of attorney for the other 3 groves, but she became greedy and wanted to sell your grove. She said she could forge a power of attorney for your grove, and we would disappear before any of the owners, including you, found out. By the way, how did you find out? I shrugged. People talk and gossip, and eventually, it got back to Pete, who called me to ask if I was selling the grove without his knowledge. By that time, our banker had seen the fake document and called me to tell me about his suspicions. Hell, even Bubba found us to talk about tractors. It seemed like everyone knew something fishy was going on. By the way, did Matt find you? He was furious that you were willing to steal $20,000 from him. When he thought you were just deceiving me, he didn't even know about you and his mom. But he was going to find you and get his $20,000. Bruce laughed quietly. He almost caught me. I was hiding in an empty rented house that almost no one knew about, in one of the groves. But Matt knew about it because when we were in school, we would go there to smoke if we had the money to buy it. I went out onto one of the roads through the grove and saw his truck on the other side. I realized that this was not good, but he did not see my truck. I think we were hidden behind the trees or something, but I was just about to sell the truck, so I didn't worry about it. Bruce fell silent again, as if gathering strength to continue speaking. The situation with Consuela at the end was completely different. I did so many kinky things with Claudia that I just wanted to exert control over Consuela. The threesomes with the other grove owners were just to distract them so they would treat me well, and it worked. They stayed away long enough for Claudia and me to close the grove sales. What fools they were to give me powers of attorney over their property. My father worked for them for years, and they expected the same from me, like a grateful serf working until exhaustion for the crumbs they paid me. I think they were surprised. Bruce looked at me to ask, "Have you tried any of these women?" Consuela is damn good. Not like Claudia, but Claire, and you can trust Consuela. No, I answered. I don't sleep with employees. It's a pity, Bruce said. I wanted you to try intim with me and Consuela, or even bring Claire and make an exchange. Claire looks pretty hot. I didn't comment on this. When you fled, I think the last place you were seen was in the Dominican Republic, but you didn't stay there. What happened between then and now? Yes, Bruce replied. We landed in the Dominican Republic on my original passport, but a couple of hours later, we flew to Costa Rica, where I used the new Panamanian passport. Claudia, I believe, had a Honduran one. We arrived at the San Jose airport in Costa Rica and spent a couple of days there. We stayed at a casino hotel where the bar was filled with available women. Claudia and I were hanging out at the bar, drinking, and she was picking out one of the girls based on what they were willing to do. Many didn't want to engage with women, so we let them go, but there were still plenty of options, and we had some fun nights there. Then we went to the West Coast and did some deep-sea fishing. It's great there, you should try it. Marlin, swordfish, sailfish, you name it. Claudia found a new interest there too. One day, she brought back an effeminate guy, an American, as she called him, but he also had a night with women. I won't even describe some of the things we did with this guy. He was thin, his body was clean-shaven, and he was just as perverted as Claudia. I was tired of Bruce's bragging, so I motioned with my hand for him to continue. We stayed there for about a week. By then, we thought our money had stopped being sent and was in the bank account. Next stop, Panama. This is where everything went to hell. We boarded a flight to Panama City, the capital. The flight was okay, but when we got off, Claudia went to get the rental car while I went to get my luggage. That was the last time I saw Claudia. She left me. I looked for her at the airport for an hour before I realized she was gone. I was the scapegoat. I hired people in Panama to look for her, but she had completely disappeared. I'm not even sure she was actually from Panama. I rented a hotel room, and the next day I found out where the bank where my account was opened was located and went there. Sorry, sir, but your wife withdrew all the money from the account yesterday. No, sir, we don't know what she did with it. She took everything in bearer bonds you bought. Bruce lowered his head and sat shaking his head. Can you believe it? She stole my money right from under my nose. I wasn't completely broke because I still had money from your account and from selling the tractors and my truck, but it was a little more than $100,000, much less than the $15 million. I felt sick thinking about how I had been deceived, but someone at the top must have been looking out for me. The next morning, I received a call from the bank saying that the last $1 million had just been transferred from abroad. Of course, I wanted to get it. I went back to the bank as quickly as possible and transferred the money to a new account, one without her name attached. That's the whole story. It goes without saying that Claudia lied to me about the ALS treatment in Panama. I consulted the best doctors there, and the only treatments they knew of were the same ones available in the States. After all, she lied to me and stole most of my money. However, with over $1 million in my pocket, I could live a luxurious life for decades in Panama, but I didn't like it there. I moved at least every 6 months, and more often if I thought someone was getting too close. With the remaining money, I was able to buy Canadian documents that would pass muster unless there was the most in-depth investigation, something only intelligence agencies could conduct. Nobody cared enough about me to try that hard. Maybe I'm paranoid, but there were a few times when people seemed to ask questions about me that made me nervous. Leaving the country with a new name seemed reasonable, so here I am. I think I should change hotels now. If you can find me, other people can too. You said you weren't going to turn me over to the authorities, right? I nodded. No point in doing that now. I just feel pathetic for calling you a friend for most of my life. Do you remember that girl Connie Lopez who took my virginity? Certainly. She was hot. I was with her long before you. Well, she told me a long time ago that you were not my friend and that one day you would betray me. She was right. I stood up and headed toward the door. Hey, you were the closest person I was friends with, Bruce said, but I couldn't help myself. I told you. After all, I'm a psychopath. He was still laughing as I closed the door behind me and walked down the hallway to the front desk. As I walked through the check-in area, I saw 2 large, fierce-looking men sitting there. I caught their gaze and nodded to them. They understood what I meant. I placed Bruce's room key on one of the side tables and walked out the door. That night, I boarded a flight back to Nashville. About a week later, I read that a man's body had been found in a secluded forest outside of Quebec City, Canada. The first report stated that the man had been severely beaten with baseball bats while he was alive, and there were marks in the surrounding soil. Then, 2 men, one on each side, shot him 6 times each, for a total of 12 shots, with .38 caliber revolvers. Due to the number of bullets and the lack of casings, authorities believed that .38 caliber revolvers were used. They had no clues as to who the culprits might be. Canadian authorities were unable to identify him at that time because his Canadian documents turned out to be false. In the Canadian documents, he was listed as Jack Monner, but this man did not exist in Canadian archives. When they searched his last known location, a hotel room less than 5 miles away, they found several other sets of documents. A couple of weeks later, a small story on an online news site reported that Canadian authorities had allegedly identified the victim as Bruce McWilliams, who was wanted in Florida on several charges and had fled the States several years ago. Although I told Bruce the truth that I would not go to the police and turn him in, I was lying by omission. There was that Grove owner from New Jersey whose Grove Bruce sold. I promised him that if I heard anything about Bruce or his whereabouts, I would let him know. I thought it was only fair that Bruce's end came at the hands of another psychopath who was even more cruel than he was. Perhaps there was something wrong with me too because I didn't mourn or shed a single tear for Bruce. What do you think of our story today? In my opinion, the situation is unpleasant first of all for the husband, but at the same time he got a great revenge on his wife. What's your opinion? Write in the comments. Until new videos.